Should parents be paying or made to pay VAT for private school fees? Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer has announced a flagship policy to impose 20% VAT on independent school fees and the removal of business rate reliefs from private schools. If his party gets into power at the next general election. Labour claims that it would raise £1.7 billion to fund improvements to the state education, including the hiring of more teachers. But some parents who send their kids to private schools say that they'll be forced to work longer hours, even take second jobs on to be able to afford it. So is it a good idea, or does this just punish hard-working parents who want to give their child the best education they can? Whatever your thoughts on this, 0207 862 2222 is the number, and we'll speak to you in just a moment. Angela, what do you think about this? Is this unfair?
Completely unfair. This is classic ideological warfare, the politics of envy, call it what you will, and that lazy assumption amongst many in Labour and that side of the political spectrum that private education is only gifted to those who come from rich parents. There are lots of hard-working people who decide that they want to put their money, they'll scrimp and save, and I have known parents like that who will scrimp and save and go without for lots of other reasons in order to send to private school. I was from a very ordinary background, no professional parents, all that kind of thing. I went to a private school because I was gifted a scholarship by the local authority, and that was based on academic excellence. It wasn't means tested, but equally there were those who went to private school because the local authority gave bursaries to those who couldn't afford them. My brother got a bursary, and I remember my mum said that she went to the headmaster of the state primary school who said, if you have to scrub the streets, send your son to this school because it's such a good school. This was Manchester Grammar School. Such a good school with a world-class reputation. OK, there are lots of brilliant state schools. My children all went to state schools because we were very lucky that a school very close to us is a really great state school, OK? That was brilliant. I didn't have to face that argument. But equally, there are lots of people who are not in that position. Yes, we need to lift up the standards of state schools. I understand all of that. But why force 90,000 odd kids into the state system, putting greater pressure on the state system when there are parents? And we live in a I'm a free marketeer. It's a matter of choice. OK, well, I'm sorry if I've got the statistics wrong. I can't read my own writing. It is 90,000.
Scaremongering.
OK. The point being, OK, well, we
like
can...
special interest group.
We can argue with your incorrect statistics later, but the point is... But in all seriousness, OK, from the philosophical perspective or from my ideological perspective, it is so utterly unfair to take away that choice. We live in a free market. That's the idea.
Choice will still be there. It will just be a more expensive choice.
Exactly. Look, I can hear the world's smallest, tiniest violin being played as you say that. Look, now the 6 to 7% who send their kids to private schools overwhelmingly better off. There are a few poorer kids they hide behind, but they're overwhelmingly better off. Average day fees, if you send your kid to a day school, over 15,000 quid. That's double what a state school gets for a kid. 7,500, 8,000 is the average to a state school. The idea of putting VAT on, because it's not a charity, come on, it's not a charity. Eton, Winchester, all the others, they're not charities. The idea of putting the 20% VAT on is that will be spent on the 93% of kids who go to the real public schools, including kids from the overwhelming majority of middle-class families in this country. That's the idea. OK, but Kevin, part of the argument on this is actually if you're going to increase the amount for private schools, there's going to be something like 300 pupils move out of private education into state education, putting more pressure on the Institute of Fiscal Studies, look, it's a very respected think tank, and they reckon 3 to 7% of kids might move in to the real public sector. That is a tiny fraction of the money that will be raised. Labour think it'll be 1.6, 1.7 billion. By the way, the Institute of Fiscal Studies think it'll be 1.3 to 1.5. Keir Starmer went to an independent school. He went to what became a private school. It was a grammar, and it changed when he was there, so he was allowed to go through it. His parents didn't pull him out. No, they didn't pull him out, but he didn't have to pay because he'd already gone there. Then
Angela,
it
you can
changed.
also have different opinions to your parents. His parents made a choice to send him there, but he could make a different choice.
Well, the other thing is, yeah, kids don't really choose. You go to the school by and large, your parents send you to.
We had discussions with our kids because at one point, you know, with one of our kids, it was like we weren't sure what the intake was in the state school that year because it was going to be quite small. Did he want to go somewhere with bigger classes? So you do, you know, that's the whole point. You empower and you inform your kids. Ultimately, the parents make the decision. But what really beefs me up about this argument is this idea is that there is this automatic sense of entitlement from wealthy parents. We send to private schools because we buy our way in.
Most don't.
Also,
most don't. 93% of kids go to the real public schools, state schools.
There's also
you can shake your charity tin for the 7% who buy their way out as much as you like. Now,
Angela's saying that there's an academic requirement to get into private schools, and so it's also very smart children you're depriving.
I tell you, I used to live in southwest London, and there are some private schools for really thick kids.
Yeah, but we can slink.
Come on.
There's private stuff for everybody if you want to pay for it. Of course there are.
But you can choose.
The point is,
pay your VAT, pay your tax.
If you're already going to scrimp and save to send your child to a school, you're going to want to look at the academic results at the other end of it.
But why should you get a tax handout?
Well, we're going to speak to somebody now. I'd like to bring in a parent and campaigner, Tony Perry, into this discussion. Tony, what is your connection to this story and why do you feel so passionately about it?
This is very much of a personal issue for me. I am one of those parents who may well have to take their son out of the school that they've put him in very quickly. In my case, I have two children, one in a state school, one now in an independent school. My son is there in year 6. And we had started both of our children in state schools, and my son struggled with reading and writing from the very beginning, and the school was using the best of their resources to support him, but he continued to fall behind year on year on year. And we saw potential in him and made the decision to actually transfer him across into an independent school at the start of year 5. He had been diagnosed with ADHD by the end of year 1. As I said, he was struggling with reading and writing. In year 5, he had gotten additional support. We had actually found that he also has dyslexia and dysgraphia as well. And over that year, the improvement has been marked. He is so much more confident now in terms of his reading.
Tony,
so
I hear why you sent your child to private school, but Kevin would say, what's the problem with an additional 20%? If you can afford to send your child to private school, you can afford the additional VAT.
That's an interesting argument, and I did want to touch back to that Institute for Fiscal Studies paper because I've actually read it. I'm an analyst in my day job, and if you take a close look at it, frankly, the maths do not hold up, at least in my very strong view. Number one, if you look back at that, the 20% tacking on, right? They looked at what school fees did over 10 or 20 years and said, well, if they went up over, I think, 24% over 10 years, then sure, people can just pay an additional 20% right now. Those are totally different propositions. It doesn't reflect the fact that we've had a cost of living crisis, we've had inflation, we've got war, and people are just more generally financially aware and vulnerable, frankly.
I think we can actually see a diagram that's trying to depict what you were just saying there. So we've got the lower line there is the private school, and the upper line is actually boarding school. So still private school, but just where you board. That's why it's slightly more expensive. And you can see towards the end there, they sort of go up. I'm not going to say exponentially, but a lot more. The curve gets a lot more steep. So you've started a petition to stop this from happening. How much support have you had from it?
Quite a lot. So our campaign is called Education Not Taxation. There's a website, educationnottaxation.org. I set up a petition back in October. That's what launched this. And we now have over 73,000 supporters. And if you just read their stories, you've got parents who have moved children into independent schools for a range of reasons, whether it's special education needs or being bullied where they were, or a range of other reasons. And the point I want to add to this is that we're really oversimplifying the problem here. You're looking at independent schools and state schools as if they're homogenous, but we were just speaking earlier in the conversation before I joined about grammar schools. Well, how does that more reflective of our society than independent schools? I do not understand that. Why is it okay for me as a parent to send my child to one of the best grammar schools in the world? We've got 2 near where I live. And that's okay. And I have no qualms with that. And it's for free. But then I have to actually pay a penalty to send my son who, because of his education needs, wouldn't qualify for that sort of education.
Kevin, I'll let you answer that.
Tony, I hope your child prospers and does well and any problem solved. But I could produce from the other 93% many parents who would say their child is suffering with all sorts of problems, lack of equipment, leaking roofs, not pens and pencils, because the sector is underfunded, which the whole idea is you've decided to go private, but you're not paying that when it's put that on because you're doing something for you and your family, so it's not a charity, and then that money will be spent on other kids. So you deprive those other kids because you're saying basically the 93% would penalise you, but aren't the 7% penalising the 93%?
Tony, very
Actually,
quickly.
no, because I'm saving the money. I'm saving the state money because we're already paying taxes and those are not being used, but because we are not sending our child into the state sector. So
Okay.
we are contributing as it is.
Yeah, right. I hear that argument from people who use private healthcare, but I don't buy it because they can just jump queues.
Well, I think this is just, maybe what you feel about private healthcare and private schools in general. But Tony Perry, thank you very much for your call there. Jilly from West Yorkshire, where do you sit in this debate? I mean, perhaps you just don't agree with private schools at all.
Hi there. I actually do think it's unfair. I went to private school from the age of 11 to 16. My parents worked really, really hard to send me. My dad was a builder. My mum was in secretarial work. And yeah, I feel very lucky. So I do think it's unfair. And a lot of the girls I went to school with weren't from rich families. You know, the parents worked really, really hard to send them there. Obviously, yeah, there were a lot of kids that were from well-off families, but you know, there's a lot of poor families that worked hard so that the kids could be there, and I feel very blessed.
But it would just be, but Jilly, it would just be 20% more, which would be a little bit more of a stretch for these families, and then that money could go to help the state school, which may have very smart kids with parents that can't do that stretching, even if they tried really, really hard.
Yeah. I mean, I understand that. I mean, I was a single parent of 3 kids, and my kids were bright, but I obviously couldn't afford to send my kids to private school. But my mum and dad wouldn't have been able to do that if there'd been the extra 20%. I mean, they struggled buying uniforms. A lot of the school trips I couldn't go on because they couldn't afford, but that was fine. But no, I just disagree. My mum and dad wouldn't have, I wouldn't have had that privilege. So I just think it's really unfair. And a lot of the children that I went to school with that went to private schools from the poorer families were very, very intelligent. And I just think it's unfair.
Jilly, thank you for your call. Why did you scoff at that?
Because they're very intelligent kids going to the real public schools are 93%, whether they're run by your local authority, academy, a free school, a grammar school, or whatever else. We just hear so much special pleading by those who are going to private schools, who are opting out and buying privilege. Look, I want to hear it for the 93%. I want to hear it for the overwhelming majority, whether they're working class or middle class. But they are the overwhelming majority, and they have about half spent on their education what has been spent in private schools.
Karina from Dorset, what's your thoughts on this?
Hello, thanks for having me on today. I have 2 children. I've got a 12-year-old daughter and a 9-year-old son, both of whom were in state school, but unfortunately suffered very bad bullying, and this continued over a couple of years. I'd spoken to the headmaster. I'd basically done all that I could, and eventually we ended up having to move them for their own mental health to private school. Okay. We do get a very hefty bursary. Both of us, we work full time. I've never been in private education at all for my whole life. And being raised, it was a single mum raising me. So I've never had that privilege. I think the school that we're currently at the moment, there were currently a lot of what they would refer to as old money, where parents, yes, they were very rich, had very good educations, and they were, naturally passing that on to their children. There are now a lot of parents who are just working full time. They are sacrificing things, luxuries like their holidays, nice cars, etc., which is what we do. We have no luxuries, but Karina, for the sake of our children.
Just to play the other side of this story out, Kevin would say that if they taxed some of these wealthier parents an extra 20%, put that back into the state school, maybe the state school that your kids went to, or a different state school if you chose to send them to a different school to get rid of the bullying, could have handled that situation, the bullying situation, better, would have more funding and more maybe specialist teachers, more things that they could have done to mitigate the bullying situation that your kids were going through and make it easier for them?
I think, why should I be penalised when we, as parents, we both work full time to be able, and as I said, we sacrifice, we don't have holidays, we don't even own our own property, we don't have enough money to be able to put a deposit down to get a mortgage and a new house, so therefore we're currently renting. We sacrifice everything, and, if this is our one luxury, it's to give our children the better start in life. Why should I be penalised for that? Plus also, I think with the 20%, there is no way that we would be able to then continue to send our children to private school. And I think just taxing parents the 20%, I still don't think that is going to be enough. The class sizes, the schools around here are so oversubscribed.
We'll have to just wait and see what happens at the next general election and whether Labour follow through with this plan. But Karina, thank you very much for your call. Thanks for all your calls. We're going to have to move on. Matt Allwright is here.